And welcome in to CBSN, everyone. I'm Josh Elliott, and let's get right to it, shall we? A day of high drama and anticipation and surreal protest in the nation's capital. Presumptive GOP nominee Donald Trump. You see him there, some still photos in advance of a meeting this morning he had with House Speaker Paul Ryan, RNC Chairman Reince Priebus, and several other GOP leaders, all at RNC headquarters in the nation's capital. And after that meeting wrapped, Reince Priebus tweeted the following message, and I quote, "The meeting was great. It was a very positive step toward party unity." End quote. We're going to hear from Paul Ryan, House Speaker, coming up again. He is scheduled to be meeting with the press at 11:30, so that's at the bottom of the hour, just under 30 minutes from now. We will carry those comments live. In advance of that, however, to break it all down, what we might hear and what has come to pass, CBSN political contributor Leslie Sanchez, CBS News political editor Steve Chaggaris, and senior Washington correspondent at Politico, Anna Palmer, and chief Washington correspondent for Yahoo News, Olivier Knox. A cast of thousands, so let's get right to it. Shaq, you want to start with you. What might you expect to hear from Paul Ryan when he does begin his comments roughly 1/2 hour from now?
Well, I think we're going to expect to hear what we expected to hear going into today and what we heard Reince Priebus say in his tweet, that the meeting was great, period, and it was a very positive step toward unity. I mean, I don't think anybody expected there were going to be, confetti and celebrations coming out of this thing. I think everybody looked at this as going to be a first step for the Republican establishment to sit down with their presumptive nominee and figure out a way to start talking about issues, start talking about the way they're going to move forward together in terms of fundraising, in terms of organization, and in terms of perhaps policy as well. And so, I think we'll hear a little bit more detail, obviously, from Ryan in his news conference at 11:30. But I think it's going to be along the lines of what we expected, which is it's a positive first step. They're getting to know this guy. We've been talking about for the last few days about how Ryan doesn't know Donald Trump, and this was an opportunity for him to sit down with him and try to get to know the guy who's going to be at the top of the ticket. And so, I think more of what Reince Priebus said in his tweet, and a lot more detail, perhaps, but nothing in terms of final solutions about unity.
Mm-hmm. And Reince Priebus has had to walk a very narrow rope throughout this process, and now really stands between two men who sit in terms of philosophy and policy diametrically opposed on so many positions. What do you expect Paul Ryan to tell us about this meeting?
I don't think there's going to be a lot of details, right? I think the best thing for Paul Ryan is to say we met, we started a dialogue, and I don't think you're going to hear any details in terms of any specifics of what was discussed or him actually committing to support Trump right now. I think he's walking a very fine line, not only as a leader of House Republicans and having a huge weight on his shoulders in terms of making sure that his troops can be reelected, and there's been a lot of kind of worry and concern among establishment Republicans of what Donald Trump will mean at the top of the ticket. I also think this is also Paul Ryan looking to his political future, 2020. There's a lot of talk that he might want to run for president, and if that's the case, he has to kind of figure out how he can thread the needle of being supportive or not hurting the Republican Party, but at the same time maybe not aligning himself with the policies that Donald Trump espouses.
Olivia, I want to bring you in here, and I'm going to read you a joint statement that just arrived from House Speaker Paul Ryan and Donald Trump. The United States cannot afford another 40 years of the Obama White House, which is what Hillary Clinton represents. That is why it's critical that Republicans unite around our shared principles, advance a conservative agenda, and do all we can to win this fall. With that focus, we had a great conversation this morning. While we were honest about our few differences, we recognize that there are also many important areas of common ground. We will be having additional discussions, but remain confident there's a great opportunity to unify our party and win this fall, and we are totally committed to working together to achieve that goal. We are extremely proud of the fact that many millions of new voters have entered the primary system, far more than ever before in the Republican Party's history. This was our first meeting, but it was a very positive step toward unification. So, Olivier, again, that statement seems to acknowledge many things. There are few differences, as they do mention, but also common ground that they both officially see, if you will. What are your thoughts when you hear that statement?
Well, there are few differences. I mean, they're pretty far apart on some pretty basic matters of how government should shape American life. I mean, Donald Trump has said that he won't touch entitlements, although now he's walking that back a little bit. Paul Ryan's budget, his famous budget, the thing that really landed him on the political map, called for a fundamental overhaul of those entitlements. So Paul Ryan has come out and said that he basically doesn't trust Donald Trump's vision of executive power. That's a pretty significant thing. The statement does acknowledge, though, that the main unifying force for Republicans this year is going to be Hillary Clinton. People have been discussing how important this meeting is, and I think it's a lot less important than the number that's been the most important thing to follow about Donald Trump since he announced, which is the percentage of Republican voters who tell pollsters that under no circumstances could they possibly vote for Donald Trump in November.
Those numbers, that's just one number, Leslie, of a series that speak to the historic unfavorables that we see with regard to Donald Trump as held by the electorate right now. Olivier also mentioned the walk back to a degree on entitlements. We also heard just last night Donald Trump walk back to a degree his call for a temporary ban on Muslims entering the country, saying, well, that was just a suggestion, though the context when it was first announced would suggest something else entirely. What to make then of what some could see as the softening of certain key stances in advance of a meeting, again, with a man in Paul Ryan, to whom he is diametrically opposed on so many positions.
Right. And so the questions are tone and is he reasonable? Mm-hmm. Can he tamper down the tone so that he can be reasonable so that you can build a unifying national coalition? That's basically what my colleagues are talking about very eloquently, is like all those pieces have to come together so he can move on some of those solutions and a very strong conservative free market-based platform. But I think for me personally, it came down to the 3 M's. It was the map. I think they're looking at the map where the Trump campaign can say, look, this is where I think we're going to be strong in the Ohio River Valley, in the Rust Belt, that I think they can change diametrically what the map looks like. They're talking about money. Can Trump and create with the RNC a victory fund so they can start raising that massive amount of money they need and come to an agreement on that? And the third part is mobilization. Can they tactically come up with an infrastructure that can get people to get the vote out, especially among so many Republicans who are really kind of on the fence as to whether or not they would support a Trump candidacy? So those were probably the strategic elements that need some tactical elements before they're going to be able to get to an agreement.
And Steve, to Leslie's point, there was a lot of belief that part of the thrust of Paul Ryan's initial stance, that he was not ready to support Donald Trump just yet, was in fact giving cover to his congressional colleagues that he might believe needed protection down the ballot. And perhaps it was also a signal to big donors that perhaps was saying, look, if you're going to open your wallets, perhaps we just protect our majorities in Congress rather than throw it all behind Donald Trump, at least at this point. With the recent numbers, though, showing that in key battleground states, swing states like Pennsylvania and Ohio, that these two presumptive nominees, or one and a likely nominee in Hillary Clinton, that they're essentially running neck and neck. How did those, do you think, how do you think those numbers impacted the meeting that was held today?
Well, just let me speak to your first point about the reason maybe Ryan said what he said. And I think one thing we're not talking enough about, and Republicans up and down were telling me all week, we have to remember the timing of all of this. Trump was planning on being in this race for another month and was planning on fighting for this nomination until the convention in July. And so the fact that Ted Cruz and John Kasich dropped out last week, when they did, was a shock to everybody in the Republican Party, including Trump, including Paul Ryan. Ryan has said it repeatedly. And so I think they were all caught off guard and found themselves in a situation where now they had to make a decision on how they were going to move forward with Trump as the presumptive nominee a month or longer before they thought he was going to be their guy at the top of the ticket. And so, what Ryan was doing first and foremost was not jumping on the bandwagon immediately like some of his other colleagues in the Republican Party had done, and was really sort of approaching this cautiously. One, because he doesn't know who this guy is. He's never really met him except for one brief meeting at a fundraiser in 2012. But also, I think, like you said, to give people in the House and in his party a little bit of cover to say, take your time. Don't necessarily jump on board immediately with this. Let's see what this guy really has to say, how he's going to act on the stump moving forward, how he's going to try to pivot from being a boisterous primary candidate into being the general election presidential nominee for the party. So that's first and foremost. I think moving forward, Republicans did see that poll this week that showed Trump running neck and neck. And I think there were Republicans who said, well, wait a minute now, scratching their chin and saying, this guy could actually be competitive in some swing states. Maybe, just maybe, if we play our cards right and he plays his cards right, this could be less than what some folks have been saying, a slam dunk for Hillary Clinton in November. And maybe this could really be a chance for Trump to win in the general election, and maybe he won't have such a negative effect on some of the candidates down ballot. Now, the question moving forward is, first of all, can he take advantage? First of all, is this real? I mean, there's the question about how accurate the polling is. But secondly, can he take advantage of these kinds of things? Can he reposition himself, going from a guy who campaigned very hard for votes in a primary with voters who are very, very upset at the system, very, very upset at the establishment, and upset with politicians writ large in Washington? Can he pivot now to speaking to Americans? Are all Americans feeling that way, or a majority of Americans feeling that way? And how does he pivot from taking that momentum in a Republican primary, translating that into swing states and into a general election and a general electorate who may have that general sentiment and may not? I mean, that's what he has to figure out, and that's what I think, the delicate dance between him and the establishment right now. I mean, this primary was a rejection of the Republican establishment, and I think Ryan and Priebus have to understand that a little bit going into these meetings today, that this was not an election that said, we're fine, where Republican voters said, we're fine with the establishment the way it is. They're not. They're clearly not. And so that balance moving forward is going to be very interesting to watch as well.
And you could really argue that perhaps it is a victory, Donald Trump's, for populism over conservatism, over policy, pragmatism perhaps. And yet, in terms of policy, the differences between Donald Trump and Paul Ryan, and perhaps to that extent the GOP establishment, are vast. I want to give you guys just a brief look at some of the gaps between the two.
They want to cut your Social Security. I'm not cutting your Social Security.
You cannot tackle the debt crisis that's coming in America if you do not fix this entitlement problem.
We have at least 11 million people in this country that came in illegally. They will go out.
And we have to come up with a solution that doesn't involve mass deportations.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
What was proposed yesterday is not what this party stands for.
That speaks, Anna Palmer, to however the bon mots might read initially. The statement we just read from both Speaker Ryan and Donald Trump, and Reince Priebus' tweet previous that said this was a great first step and it was a really great meeting. You know, bridging the gaps, the divides that we just saw, and those are just, again, just a few issues that they spoke to in that as well. Is it possible, in your mind, for somebody of Paul Ryan's stance on these issues, but also his standing, to find a way over the transom to Donald Trump and vice versa?
It's definitely going to take some political gymnastics in terms of trying to figure out a way for them to kind of unify, as that statement kept on saying, right? That they were going. This was a part about unifying the party. That's what they were both very focused on. But what I really think what you saw in those clips were Paul Ryan has been very strategic. He is not unprovoked. Only when provoked has he tried to go after Trump, and even then in pretty measured ways. We've talked to his staff and even asked him about this before, and I think he's really tried to only kind of punch him when he felt like the things that Trump was saying were so outlandish or so not in line with where the Republican orthodoxy is that he had to make a statement. He was provoked to do it. I think the thing that is most striking to me from that statement, that the joint statement they just put out, is they're going to unify, they're going to try to work together, but there certainly was no endorsement. And so there's still this kind of uncomfortable position where Paul Ryan is the chairman of the Republican National Convention, and he has yet to endorse the party's presumptive nominee. When that happens, if that will happen, it's hard to see him stay in that role without actually making some kind of formal endorsement.
And Leslie, you were nodding your head and smiling when
Yeah.
she referred to political gymnastics. I mean, are we talking Olympic caliber gymnastics?
Well, seriously, it's like the Speaker Ryan, he's just not that into you tour. You know, he's trying to make amends and trying to see it's this arranged marriage that they're in. But fundamentally, if you just cut to the chase, we do not, as Republicans, want to support a xenophobic protectionist who goes against everything fundamentally that we all believe in. You know, so can there be a balance that's tempered, realistic? Because on the issue, you talk about immigration, you know, and the 11 million, no one is. It's not common or conventional wisdom to think you're going to deport 11 or 12 million people. There has to be pragmatic solutions that are sensitive, that don't dehumanize individuals, but are really embracing an immigrant culture, pro-immigrant culture that America stands for. So there's a lot of tone, and there's a lot of very serious details that need to be worked through.
And Olivier, we had Rosario Marin, I know a friend of Leslie Sanchez is on, the former treasurer under George W. Bush. And a foreigner born in Mexico City, in fact, come on the air today and echo the thoughts of still a fairly pronounced group of GOP leadership, that there is nothing that Donald Trump can say, never ever, that will make her vote, that will allow her to vote for him. So to find myself, and I know people that do what we do for a living, to find ourselves asking GOP leaders if they are prepared to cast a vote for Hillary Clinton still speaks to the divide that we're seeing here.
There's an old story of Democratic presidential candidate Adlai Stevenson on being told that he had the support of all thinking people. That's nice, but I need a majority. It's fine for GOP leaders to come out and do this. The problem is it's not clear that their voters are listening to them very much. You know, to Leslie's point about the party not wanting to elect someone who holds these views, Donald Trump has more votes in the primaries thus far than Mitt Romney had throughout the entire primary cycle last time around. It's not really clear that this is actually a hostile takeover, so much as an assertion of control by a certain part of the party. So you know, I don't know how much these leaders are going to affect their voters, their down-ballot races. Paul Ryan very recently was trying to carve out a lot of space for people to run essentially as Paul Ryan Republicans. He did a group interview with some of us who write a lot about foreign policy and staked out a ground that was neither George W. Bush nor explicitly Donald Trump. He's been trying to carve out that space. I don't know how long that's tenable for him for all the reasons that my colleagues have laid out.
Steve, you have said, among many, you know, throw out every rule, everything you think you know. Every time you find yourself referring to a poll that suggests what we think might happen, we really have to put it all away. So to Olivier's point, something you and I have discussed, that perhaps this isn't so much about Donald Trump as it is about the electorate that has come out in support of him in record numbers.
Well, let's not just talk about Trump here. Let's also talk about what's happened on the Democratic side and why Bernie Sanders is still in this race. There is a large chunk of people on both sides who are upset at the establishment, upset at traditional politicians, upset at people who for years have not spoken directly to voters. And they see in both of those guys, Trump and Sanders, people who are telling it like it is and are basically throwing Washington under the bus, right? And I think that's where the electorate is. The question is in terms of a general election, how does that all play out? We do know, and this is not working in Paul Ryan's favor, that for years Americans have been upset with Congress. Their approval rating among Americans is in the teens. And so to think that Paul Ryan has a bigger stage here or a bigger point to make than Donald Trump, it's hard to make that argument. And so I think Ryan and Priebus and others in Congress have to understand that, yes, they have things they want to do. Ryan has an agenda he wants to move forward. He has an idea of how he wants the party to act and the things that he wants the party to say and the issues that he wants to promote and wants the party to promote. But at the end of the day, are Americans on board with this? Are Republican voters on board with this? And what we've seen, I think, consistently is they're not necessarily on board. And so, again, throw out everything we've seen. We're looking through a lot of this through the traditional lens of Republicans in Congress and policy and where are they going to go and how's that going to affect November. I mean, we've got people like Trump and Sanders who are sort of throwing out a lot of the old rules. And the electorate, I think, is on a different plane than everybody else who's been watching this campaign for the last several months.
I want to give the four big brains of my panel just a chance to rest and gather. Find your emotional centers. We're going to take a quick break here at CBSN. Again, we are looking ahead just under 8 minutes now. If things run to schedule, we expect to hear from House Speaker Paul Ryan after a meeting that really had the spotlight of the nation leading up to it this morning with GOP presumptive nominee Donald Trump. Can the party unify behind Donald Trump? We expect some sort of answer from Paul Ryan coming up. We'll have his remarks live. Stay with us right here. You're watching CBSN.